Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Yet today, its economy lies in ruins. This contradiction is not accidental. For decades, Venezuela and the United States shared one of the closest economic relationships in the Western Hemisphere. American companies operated Venezuela's oil fields. Venezuelan crude powered the U.S. economy. Then the relationship broke. What followed was not a single event, but a chain of decisions, reactions, and power struggles that reshaped an entire nation. Officially, the conflict is framed as a battle for democracy. Unofficially, it is about control of resources, influence, and political direction in Latin America. Sanctions were imposed, governments were challenged, leaders were removed or attempted to be removed. Each action was justified. Each response escalated the conflict. In 2002, a sitting Venezuelan president was briefly overthrown. Within days, he returned to power. The question remains unanswered. Who supported the coup and why? Years later, the United States recognized a different president, one who never won a national election. Again, the justification was democracy. Again, the consequences were severe. Venezuela's economy collapsed. Inflation reached historic levels. Millions left the country. Was this the inevitable failure of socialism? Or the predictable result of sustained external pressure? This documentary does not begin with conclusions. It begins with facts. Because to understand what happened to Venezuela, we must ask a more uncomfortable question. Who actually benefits when a country rich in resources becomes poor? And more importantly, was Venezuela's collapse an internal failure or part of a much larger geopolitical strategy? To answer that, we must examine the decisions made in Washington, the policies implemented in Caracas, and the global system that rewards power far more than stability. This is not a story. This is a case study, and it begins here. Chapter number 1, The Birth of a Nation, Venezuela's Independence. Venezuela did not begin as a failed state. It began as a colonial asset. For more than 3 centuries, Venezuela existed under Spanish rule, its economy designed not for development, but for extraction. Cocoa, coffee, and later oil would flow outward. Power would remain elsewhere. Independence was not inevitable. It was contested, fragmented, and deeply unstable from the start. In 1783, Simón Bolívar was born into a wealthy Creole family in Caracas. He would later become the symbol of liberation across South America. But Bolívar's vision was not simply independence from Spain. It was the creation of a unified, sovereign Latin America strong enough to resist foreign domination. That vision would fail. By the early 19th century, Spain's empire was weakening. European wars drained its resources. Colonial loyalty fractured. In 1811, Venezuela declared independence. Within 1 year, the republic collapsed. Civil war followed. Royalist forces regained control. Independence leaders were exiled, executed, or defeated. Venezuela would declare independence and lose it multiple times. From the beginning, the nation was unstable. Bolívar returned with an army fueled by revolutionary ideals and foreign support. After years of brutal conflict, Spain was finally defeated. In 1821, Venezuela became part of a new political experiment, Gran Colombia, a vast union stretching from modern-day Colombia to Ecuador. It was meant to be a shield against future empires. It lasted less than a decade. Regional elites resisted centralized power, economic interests diverged, political unity collapsed. By 1830, Gran Colombia dissolved. Venezuela emerged as an independent republic alone, divided and fragile. Independence did not bring stability. It created a vacuum. Institutions were weak. Military leaders dominated politics. Power shifted through force, not law. The colonial structure had ended, but dependency had not. From its earliest years, Venezuela faced a fundamental contradiction: political independence without economic sovereignty. The nation was free in name but vulnerable in reality. This vulnerability would define Venezuela's future. Foreign powers would return not as colonizers, but as investors, partners, and strategic interests. And in time, one country would become more influential than all others: the United States. To understand the modern conflict between Venezuela and Washington, we must first understand this moment. A nation born through revolution, divided by internal power struggles, and exposed to external influence from the very beginning. Chapter #2, Early U, Venezuela relations, 1,835, 1,998. When Venezuela emerged as an independent republic in the 19th century, it did not attract global attention. It was politically unstable, economically weak, and strategically peripheral. The United States, still defining its own role in the world, viewed Venezuela not as a rival, but as a distant opportunity. Throughout the 1800s, relations between the two countries were limited and largely transactional. Trade agreements, diplomatic recognition, occasional disputes. The United States promoted a principle it called non-colonialism in the Western Hemisphere. In practice, this meant influence without formal rule. Venezuela, meanwhile, struggled with internal conflict. Military strongmen known as caudillos dominated politics. Power changed hands through force, not institutions. Long-term development remained secondary to survival. This instability made Venezuela predictable in one way. It was open to external economic control. By the early 20th century, the equation changed. Oil was discovered. Venezuela's vast petroleum reserves transformed the country overnight from an agrarian economy into a strategic energy supplier. American and European oil companies moved quickly. Concessions were signed, infrastructure was built, profits flowed outward. For the United States, Venezuela became more than a partner. It became essential. By the 1,920 seconds and 1,930 seconds, U.S. companies dominated Venezuela's oil industry. Washington supported political stability, regardless of who provided it. Democracy was preferred, order was required. During World War II, Venezuela became a critical supplier of fuel for the Allied war effort. Oil shipments were protected, strategic cooperation deepened. Venezuela was now firmly within the U.S. sphere of influence. After the war, a new narrative emerged. Venezuela was presented as a model Latin American democracy. Elections were held, institutions strengthened, oil revenues fueled development. For Washington, this was proof that alignment worked. But beneath the surface, contradictions grew. Oil wealth was unevenly distributed. Economic dependence deepened. Political elites remained disconnected from much of the population. Stability existed, but it was fragile. In the Cold War era, U.S. foreign policy in Latin America followed a clear logic: anti-communism above all else. Governments that aligned with Washington received support. Those that challenged U.S. influence faced pressure. Venezuela remained aligned for decades. It benefited from this relationship. U.S. refineries relied on Venezuelan crude. Venezuela relied on U.S. markets, capital, and technology. The partnership appeared mutually beneficial. By the 1,970 seconds, Venezuela nationalized its oil industry. On paper, this was a declaration of sovereignty. In practice, dependence remained. The economy was still tied to oil, and oil was still tied to global markets, dominated by the United States. Then came decline, falling oil prices, rising debt, economic mismanagement. By the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, Venezuela entered a prolonged crisis. In 1989, austerity measures sparked massive protests. Hundreds were killed in state crackdowns. Public trust collapsed. The political system that Washington had once praised as stable began to unravel. By the late 1,990 seconds, Venezuela stood at a crossroads. It was still formally aligned with the United States, but its population was deeply disillusioned. Inequality was high, corruption was widespread, faith in traditional leadership had eroded. The relationship with Washington had not collapsed, but it had lost legitimacy at home. This moment created an opening, not for reform within the existing system, but for a complete rejection of it. In 1998, a former military officer ran for president on a radical promise: to dismantle the old order, to challenge U.S. influence, and to redefine Venezuela's place in the world. His name was Hugo Chávez. Chapter number 3, The Caracazo and the Rise of Hugo Chávez, 1989–1999. In February 1989, Venezuela reached a breaking point. The country was bankrupt. Oil revenues had collapsed, debt had surged, and the promises of prosperity no longer matched reality. President Carlos Andrés Pérez turned to international lenders for rescue. The solution came with conditions: austerity, subsidy cuts, fuel price increases. Public transport costs doubled overnight. For millions of Venezuelans, survival suddenly became impossible. The response was immediate. Spontaneous protests erupted in the city of Guarinas. Within hours, they spread to Caracas. What began as demonstrations quickly turned into mass unrest. Shops were looted, streets were overwhelmed, control was lost. The government declared a state of emergency. The military was deployed. What followed became known as the Caracazo. Soldiers were ordered to restore order by any means necessary. Live ammunition was used, curfews were enforced, entire neighborhoods were sealed off. Bodies were buried in mass graves. Official figures reported hundreds of deaths. Independent estimates suggest thousands. For the first time in modern Venezuelan history, the state turned its full force against its own population. Trust was shattered. The political system survived, but it was permanently damaged. Democracy now carried the memory of blood. Inside the armed forces, the Caracazo left another scar. Many officers had followed orders reluctantly. Others questioned the legitimacy of the leadership. Among them was a young lieutenant colonel. His name was Hugo Chávez. Chávez did not forget what he saw. He concluded that Venezuela was not failing by accident, it was failing by design. In 1992, Chávez led a military coup against the government. The attempt failed, and he was arrested. But something unexpected happened. Allowed to address the nation on television, Chávez took responsibility. And then he spoke two words: por ahora. For now. In that moment, he became more than a rebel. He became a symbol. To many Venezuelans, Chávez represented accountability. To others, defiance. To the political elite, a threat. He was imprisoned, but his influence grew. By 1994, Chávez was released. Instead of returning to the military, he turned to politics. He traveled the country, spoke in poor neighborhoods, listened to grievances long ignored. His message was simple: the system was corrupt, and it had to be replaced. By 1998, Venezuela's traditional parties had collapsed in credibility. Voters were not choosing a candidate, they were rejecting an era. Chávez ran for president, promising a revolution, but not yet a socialist one. He spoke of dignity, sovereignty, and justice. He promised to rewrite the Constitution, to reclaim the state from elites, and to end foreign control over Venezuela's destiny. The United States watched cautiously. Chávez had not yet challenged Washington directly. But his rhetoric was unmistakable. This would not be business as usual. In December 1998, Hugo Chávez won the presidency. Democratically, decisively. The old political order had fallen. Venezuela had chosen rupture over reform, and in doing so, it set itself on a collision course with its past. And with the United States,